According to Muslim sources, the pagans of Mecca didn't have any problem with Muhammad preaching Islam until he started denouncing their gods. A few pages later in Tabari, the pagans complain about Muhammad's religious intolerance. They say, "We have never seen the like of what we have endured from this man. He has derided our traditional values, abused our forefathers, reviled our religion, caused division among us, and insulted our gods. We have endured a great deal from him." So Muhammad reviled their religion and insulted their gods. Since Muhammad is the pattern of conduct in Islam, it should come as no surprise that his companions followed his example by insulting the gods of the polytheists. When the polytheists decided to retaliate by insulting Muhammad's God, Allah suddenly called for an end to the insults. But this was only temporary. As we read in the Tafsir of Ibn Abbas, Surah 6 verse 108 was abrogated or cancelled by Allah's command to fight the polytheists. Verse 108 is in parentheses, and Ibn Abbas's commentary is outside the parentheses. "Revile not those unto whom they pray," i.e. worship, "beside Allah, lest they wrongfully revile Allah through ignorance, because they have no knowledge or argument. This after he told them, Lo, you idolaters, and that which you worship beside Allah are fuel of hell. But then this was abrogated by the verse of fighting." In other words, when Muhammad and his followers were outnumbered in Mecca, they were commanded not to insult the polytheists because the polytheists would insult Allah in return. But when Muhammad had an army and could violently subjugate the polytheists, it was okay once again to insult their gods. And that's exactly what we find in the Muslim sources. If you've got your kids watching this with you, you might want to cover their ears for a moment, unless you're ready to explain some details about female anatomy. In the following passage, Muhammad was at war with Mecca, and a pagan named Urwa points out that there are only two possible outcomes for Muhammad. If Muhammad is victorious over his own tribe, the Quraysh, he'll be remembered as a man who slaughtered his own tribesmen. If the Quraysh are victorious over him, his followers will abandon him. Either way, Muhammad loses, so he should end his war against the Quraysh. Not a bad argument, but watch how Abu Bakr, Muhammad's closest companion and the first of the rightly guided caliphs of Islam, responds to Urwa. The History of Tabari, Volume 8, page 76. Urwa went to the Prophet and began speaking to him. The Prophet spoke as he had spoken to Budayl. Then Urwa said, "Muhammad, tell me, if you exterminate your tribesmen, have you ever heard of any of the Arabs who destroyed his own race before you? And if the contrary comes to pass, by Allah I see both prominent people and rabble who are likely to flee and leave you." Abu Bakr said, "Go suck the clitoris of Alat. Would we flee and leave him?" Alat was a goddess worshipped by Urwa. Sahih al-Bukhari, 4287. When the Prophet entered Mecca on the day of the conquest of Mecca, there were 360 idols around the Kaaba. The Prophet started striking them with a stick he had in his hand and was saying, "Al-Haq," the truth, i.e. Islamic monotheism, or this Quran or jihad against polytheists, has come, and al-Batil, falsehood, i.e. Satan or polytheism, vanished. The Muslims smashed the 360 idols of the polytheists.
Assalamu alaikum and hello to my non-Muslim viewers. Today I'm going to be talking about what David Wood says about, insulting, about does Islam allow insulting other people's religions and gods and stuff like that. So, Christian psychopath David Wood states that, basically he cites three sources. He cites the history of al-Tabari, then he cites Tafsir Ibn Abbas, then he cites Sahih Bukhari. Now, I looked at those narrations that David Wood states that the history of al-Tabari, Volume 8, and the other narration he cites, and none of those narrations are authentic. Those al-Tabari narrations. So basically, he basically says that the Prophet Muhammad, when Prophet Muhammad began to preach, he was insulting. The Meccans had no problems with him preaching Islam or monotheism, and then monotheism is in this context would be the worship of one God, which is Allah. So the Meccans had no problems with Prophet Muhammad preaching Islam or preaching monotheism until the Prophet Muhammad started insulting their gods. So I looked at the narration for that, and that's found in the history of al-Tabari. I think it's found in the history of al-Tabari, Volume 6. But anyways, the narration he cites, the narrator in the narration he cites was somebody named Ibn Humayyad, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name, but Ibn Humayyad. Ibn Humayyad was the narrator, so Ibn Humayyad was considered a liar. Was considered a liar by Muslim scholars. So because there's a weak narrator in that narration is weak. The first narration he cites, David Wood cites, is weak. The second issue is he cites a narration from Tafsir Ibn Abbas. So again, this is found in the history of al-Tabari, Volume 1, page 17 through 19, where it talks about how Ibn Humayyad is a weak narrator. The second narration he cites from was from Tafsir Ibn Abbas. So I'm going to be linking the narrations or all the references below. So is Ibn Abbas, where he says, according to Tafsir Ibn Abbas, the Quran chapter 6 verse the Quran chapter 6 where it talks about how where the verse from fighting abrogates the peaceful verse of the Quran chapter 6 where it says not to insult people's religions and gods and stuff like that has been abrogated. According to Ibn Abbas, that verse has been abrogated by the verse of fighting. I looked at the tafsir to see if that tafsir Ibn Abbas is reliable, and it turns out it's not, according to Muslim scholars. So according to Muqatil ibn Gulam, al-Qur'an, page 360 to 362, and al-Tafsir wa al-Mufassirun, page 81 through 83. That entire tafsir of Ibn Abbas is weak. It's not reliable anyways because there's weak narrators in there. So that makes the whole tafsir for the most part to be unreliable. And so that whole tafsir is weak. It's unreliable to begin with. So those two sources that David Wood cites is weak according to Muslim standards. The third source he cites was tafsir. It was History of al-Tabari, Volume 8, where he says that Abu Bakr insulted Abu Bakr insulted the pagan deities, the Meccan deity called Allah, which is Urwa's god. So he says that Islam teaches that you can insult people's gods because Abu Bakr, who was considered the first rightly guided caliph, insulted al-Allah. Al-Allah was Urwa's god. So again, I looked at the narration and I couldn't find the narrators, whether that narration is authentic or not. So I don't think that narration is authentic because first of all, it comes from a weak source. Al-Tabari is considered a weak source. Second of all, I couldn't find any chain of transmission for it. So I don't think that narration is authentic to begin with, because again, the history of al-Tabari, Volume 8, is a weak source anyways. Al-Tabari basically warns people in Volume 1 of his book that his books are filled with weak and authentic narration. So the history of al-Tabari, Volume 8 is weak anyways. Again, I just recommend people to to see, I recommend people to get this book called The History of Tabari Volume 1, where Tabari admits that his books are filled with weak and authentic narrations. So I don't think that narration is authentic, but even if it was authentic, just for the sake of argument, according to Muslim scholars like Ibn Rush al-Qayyum, he says that the meaning of that is not like an insult. When Abu Bakr says, when Abu Bakr says, "Go suck the clitoris of Allah," it's not like an offensive term. It's not like, I'm sorry for using this word, but just to get my point across, it's not like go fuck yourself or something like that. It was meant to be like an expression for forceful condemnation. It's not like modern day, F you or stuff like that. It's just an expression of forceful condemnation. So the Arabs back then would use that word as not as like an insult, but more of a what you would call it, more of a condemnation. So these words were used by all Arabic speaking people, according to Amr bin Bahar al-Azari. So according to if you read the commentaries, it says that this whole expression was not like a profanity, like modern day profanity, or obscene comment. It was just used for forceful condemnation. So basically, these words were used in the Arabic language to like condemn people. It wasn't like profanities or saying "f you" or something like that. In this context, Abu Bakr was using a well-known or current Arabic proverb, was used for condemnation. It was used when used in general description or ordinary personal disagreements. It was related to Idris's mother, according to Ibn Ishaq, who studied the Arabic language and the Arabic proverbs and stuff like that. So according to the Arabic language, it wasn't like an obscene comment. It wasn't like an insult. It was just a rhetoric of condemnation. So it wasn't meant to be taken as an insult. And again, I'll be posting the references below. So anyways, I don't think that narration is authentic anyways, because it comes from a weak source. Al-Tabari is a weak source anyways, so it's not authentic. Then David Wood says that, well, Surah 6 was abrogated by other later surahs. But that's not true, because according to the Prophet Muhammad, according to Ibn Kathir, according to these other tafsirs, according to Ibn Kathir and Prophet Muhammad and Ibn Taymiyyah and stuff, none of those verses abrogated, none of those Meccan surahs were abrogated by Medinan surahs. So it's misleading to say that the Quran chapter 6 was abrogated. No, there's no evidence for that. Prophet Muhammad never said that. Early Muslim scholars never said that. So there's no evidence that the early surahs were replaced by the later surahs. There's no evidence for that. So it's misleading to say, well, those Medinan surahs overthrew the Meccan surahs. There's no evidence for that. Prophet Muhammad never said that. Tafsir Ibn Kathir, none of the tafsirs mentioned that. So it's misleading to say which surahs abrogated which. Although there are some parts of the Quran which abrogated other parts. For example, there was a time when Muslims were allowed to drink alcohol, but this was later on abrogated to the point where Muslims weren't allowed to drink alcohol. For example, at one point, some Muslims would come to Salah or prayer drunk, and then later on, there were Quran verses revealed saying that Muslims can't drink alcohol at all. They can't drink alcohol, and Muslims can't touch alcohol at any point anymore. So that's a case of abrogation. That's a case of clear abrogation, was the drinking of alcohol. At one point it was allowed. Then when people started coming to the masjid or the mosque for prayer drunk or intoxicated, later on the verses were revealed that alcohol isn't allowed. So alcohol was completely banned. So that's a case of abrogation. That's a clear case of abrogation. The rest of the stuff, nobody knows what abrogates the other part. Like the Prophet, there's no evidence that the Prophet Muhammad said Meccan surahs were abrogated by Medinan surahs. So there's no evidence for that. So, these critics need to stop saying, well, these surahs abrogated these surahs and stuff like that. There's no evidence for that. The Quran is a whole book, right? So, you have to read the Quran. So all the verses of the Quran apply today. There's no evidence for abrogation except for this alcohol part. But anyways, the Quran says very clearly that when people start mocking Islam, you walk away. The Quran, chapter 6, verse 68. And Muslims shouldn't mock other people's religions. And this is found in the Quran, chapter 6, verse 108. So these verses still stand today. There's no evidence that they're abrogated. So this whole claim that David Wood makes is false. It's not true, regardless. So that's all I want to say about that. For that Abu Bakr thing, even if it is authentic, even if Abu Bakr really did say, "Go suck the clitoris of Allah," the clitoris of Allah, this is clearly even if it's authentic, I don't think it is, but even if it is, it was the context behind that was it was used as a force of condemnation. It wasn't used as like a profanity or anything like that. And according to people who know the Arabic language, like Arabic literary critics like Ibn al-Rasaq, al-Qayyun, he said that the Arab poets would use this word as in literary terms, and not as an insult. So it was used as an expression for forceful condemnation. So Abu Bakr was basically so Urwa insulted Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr insulted Urwa using the same a type of rhetoric. So it wasn't like a profanity or anything like that. So that's all I have to say about that. So in conclusion, Islam doesn't allow people to insult other people's religions. So the arguments of David Wood just cites weak sources. Al-Tabari, Tafsir Ibn Abbas. These sources are weak. Muslim scholars don't accept them. What about the Sahih Bukhari narration that he mentions? Well, the whole point of Islam was to bring back monotheism, the monotheism of Abraham, right? So when these Meccans, and plus he's being inconsistent anyways, because if you read the Bible, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, if you read, the Ten Commandments and all that, if you read the Old Testament is very clear that idolatry or worshiping more than one God is a serious offense according to the Old Testament version of God, the Old Testament God, right? So worshiping more than one God is a serious offense. It's a great sin according to the Old Testament. So David was being inconsistent because yes, the Prophet Muhammad destroyed the idols of the Kaaba, but that's the point. The whole point was to bring back people to the worship of Abraham, the God of Abraham, which is monotheistic. So if you read the Old Testament clearly has serious problems with people worshiping more than one God according to the Old Testament standards. And then Jesus also says worship one God in the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew. And I'll be posting all those biblical references below. So he's being inconsistent here. So yes, Prophet Muhammad destroyed idols in the Kaaba. Yes, I'm not denying that's authentic. That's the only authentic hadith he brings up in that video. But the whole point, the whole reason why he destroyed the idols was to bring people back to the worship of one God, the God of Abraham. So Prophet Muhammad was doing everybody a favor. He was bringing people back to the worship of the same God of Abraham, not these false man-made gods. So he's being inconsistent there. So that's all I want to say about this video, and hopefully this clears up what Islam says about other religions and about insulting other religions. Islam doesn't allow it according to the Quranic standards. Okay, thanks so much.